Thank you. I am delighted to be here, and I will give you some information this afternoon, some of which you already know, but there may be some new beekeepers in the audience who will say, oh, I didn't know that, and that's fine. And there are going to be some things for you to think about. So let's get started. As far as we know, everything needs pollination. The flowers need it, the bees need it, farmers, people, and wildlife needs it. Now we know quite a bit about pollination and the needs that crops have, but we have very little information on what the bees, all of the bees, provide for food for wildlife. And there's the badger waiting for something, and I hope he gets it. Now, who does the pollination? Well, we have actually around the world many pollinators. We've got the bees, of course. Some flowers simply do it without the benefit of any outside what should I say, insect or animal. Wind certainly does it, and man does it. Now, he doesn't go sort of tripping through the tulips, sprinkling pollen here and there, but human hand pollination is used to develop new varieties of various flowers, vegetables, fruits. So man takes really quite a big hand in developing the foods that we eat. The new cultivars, perhaps it's a beautiful flower, but perhaps it's a vegetable that needs to have improvement. And some countries around the world actually depend upon human pollination. There was one humorous story about catastrophes in China, and they had to employ people to go out and do hand pollination. In large areas, that's difficult. But for new variety development, it does work very well. Well, what is pollination? Pollination is the transfer of pollen from one flower to another. Now, there are all kinds of different kinds of flowers and how that it's done, but that's basically it. But we've got to remember the one thing, of the same species. There's lots of dandelions, they're very ubiquitous. Now, why don't we have these combinations? There's dandelion pollen out there. So it comes down to several things. And one is the shape of the pollen. And if you have seen photographs of pollen, you'll realize that they do come in many, many different shapes and sizes. And also it has to do with the plant itself, whether the plant recognizes chemically the pollen and if it can accept that pollen and make use of it. That's quite a complicated process. I'm not going into it here, but just keep in mind that pollen has to be transferred within the same species. Now, we have wind pollination. Conifers, they produce a vast amount of very light, fluffy pollen. and it will drift with the wind. Maybe you have seen it coming out from various conifers from time to time. We've got grasses. Now the bees don't use the conifers' pollen. It really would be very difficult if it's coming out from a cone and being blown away in the wind. But grasses are very interesting. They do produce pollen, and it is collected and used by bees. Maize is a grass, and you all know that bees do collect the pollen from that. Now, they aren't doing pollination of these plants, but they are using the pollen for their nutrition, and that works quite well. We're going to look at the flowering plants and the ways in which the plants and the pollinators, and I'm being careful not to say bees every time, the way the pollinators coordinate what the plants are doing and what the pollination needs are. And there's a lot of techniques for survival in these plants. The color. Think about a flower garden. So many different colors, and they have their own appeal to various pollinators. The aroma. You may not detect aroma from all flowering plants, and some really do not have very much aroma. It is just one of the techniques. Actually, the pollinators can sense aroma much better than we can. The human sniffing technique is really very poor when you think about what dogs can do. So honeybees can do it very well to detect aromas that we may think are insignificant. The shape of the blossom. If you read about orchids and their pollination, you realize that many different shapes can work for different pollinators. Now we've got some other techniques for survival. The time of bloom. Well, this can also be the season of bloom also, but the time of day or the month. So plants will produce their flowers in the hopes of attracting something, but there's enormous competition out there. And if everything bloomed all at the same time, the competition would be overwhelming. Probably not much would get pollinated. There's a period of bloom. If you have noticed on especially garden plants, it's very easy to notice. Some plants the flowers will open earlier in the day and perhaps close up earlier in the afternoon. Some plants will have a very short period of bloom. Others will have a longer period. Some flowers will last on a plant for quite a while, days or even weeks, or perhaps being replaced so that it seems to be an ever-blooming plant. The texture of the blossom. Now this is something quite interesting. You say, well, do blossoms have texture? Yes, they do. And for many years, botanists wondered why some petals had little bumps on them. And they thought, well, I guess they just have little bumps. But fairly recently, it was discovered that those bumps are there for a good purpose. Think about the feet of bees. It's got claws, right? So The bumps keep the bees from sliding off. And that's what the bumps are there for. Well, that's good. The bees can hang on with their clawed feet and carry out their nectar and pollen collection. Nectar and pollen production can vary within the plant. Some plants will produce nectar and then offer the pollen. Others will offer pollen and perhaps nectar later. There's varying times, so each flower can adjust this nectar and pollen production during the blossom time that will attract pollinators better than a neighboring plant that's doing something quite different. That period again is quite adjustable between flowers. So when you go out to your flower garden and are looking at the flowers, the various flowers that you have, what you need to do is think about the time, the period, that combined, how long the blossom is open. Is it open for days or hours, morning, afternoon? A dandelion blossom can be open all day, but its nectar production is in the morning, the later morning hours. It's interesting that many grasses will produce pollen early morning. Why? That's the time they do it. So the bee will learn and recognize when the pollen is being produced. What about the color? Well, there's no point in a night blooming flower to have much color. White is very visible at night. So it will be attractive to bats and moths that are out and about at night. Red is well known as an attractive color for hummingbirds in the Americas. Bees, not so much. It depends on the actual color of that red. So you may find honeybees on red-ish flowers, or maybe they're pinker or more towards the purple. But certain colors of red, the bees cannot see very well and are not attractive to them. Yellow and blue, bees like those. Again, in your flower garden, take a look and see what colors of the flowers seem to have more bee visitors. You can have quite a lot of fun with a wonderful mixed flower garden, but you'll have to look at it at various times of day and throughout a week and throughout a month. Have fun with them. Now, what makes a good pollinator? You can think back to some of the ones that I've shown you. Fur or fuzz, feathers, hairs, definitely. But there's one more thing that's very important. It's got to fly. If you gave a pollination assignment to, what shall we say, a grasshopper? Well, a grasshopper can fly, but many times they just hop along the ground. So perhaps we could give pollination to a mouse. The mouse has fur, and the mouse is going to walk or scamper. Perhaps it could visit a flower, climb back down, decide to run or scamper to another flower. Well, by this time, the plant is finished flowering. So flight is the fastest way to go. There's something else, a good sense of smell or sight. And there's been a lot of comments about the bees, especially with the dance language. Any pollinator is going to have to be able to see what they're doing, but also smell. Is there anything there? You can find out just how fast a honeybee can sense smell. And that is put a spoonful of honey outside on a nice warm day. Look at the time and see when one of your honeybees comes over and discovers it. Maybe faster than you really think. Can be quite a bit of fun because she may take the message back to the hive, and suddenly, instead of one bee, you've got 2 or 3 or 4 or more. There's got to be a need for pollen and nectar. It's a dietary need. It's not just for fun or for dessert. And you think about the dietary needs, the larvae need feeding, the pollinators need energy for flight. So without those 2 requirements, you don't have a good pollinator. We'll take a quick look at bats. They really are most common in these countries. And look what they do for you. So the next time you eat banana, think bat, all right? And think a bat. So they've got fur and they've got flight. And they've got a dietary need for what they are going to do. If they want the nectar, there are nectar bats. There are fruit-eating bats. So they can do quite a good job of pollination. Now, we have found with certain flowers, remember I talked about shape of flowers? Well, insects can cheat. If there's a long tube-shaped flower, especially if it's a narrow one, the bees can't get down into it, especially bumblebees. They're large, they don't fit. But, they bite a hole at the base of the tube and get their nectar and fly away without doing any pollination. They got their reward, they got the nectar that they need, but the flower is at loss. And honeybees will come along and say, oh, look what the bumblebee has done. I have access to nectar. And certainly honeybees will find that hole at the bottom of the tube. Now we're going to look at some other bees that pollinate. Some of you may have noticed these, and these are really very beautiful, very wonderful, small bees. Some of them are so tiny you probably never paid attention to them. And I'd like you to start paying attention to them now, as you're going out in your flower garden, watching at various times of day, times of month, and times of year. Unfortunately, they do not have common names. A few of them do. One is called a sweat bee because it likes to sip sweat from people. But as far as that goes, we'll have to put up with their scientific names. Now, these are absolutely beautiful bees. Iridescent green, iridescent blue, and even shimmery gold. Some of them are very tiny, so don't just take a quick look at the flowers. Stop and watch. And you may see something glittering in the sun and then flying to a flower. And look for these during spring, summer, and autumn. You will find some really beautiful ones. If you notice on that one there, it's not a pollen basket. The pollen is carried on hairs on the underside of the abdomen. So it looks extremely fat and fuzzy, but that yellow is the pollen. Now, the osmia bee up there in the corner is commercially used for pollination of apples and some other fruits. But again, not a common name on it. Some of these pollinate alfalfa, lucerne. Well, let's see about honeybees, which you are familiar with. They're good pollinators because of certain reasons. They exhibit flower constancy. That is, they will go back to the same species that they've been working on until it's exhausted or becomes not profitable. Then they will switch to something else that the scout bees have found, and they will use that. Now, some of those lovely small bees that you saw just a minute ago do not exhibit flower constancy. They're happy to go to this flower and then we'll go to that flower, and no pollination didn't take place. But it will if they go back again to the same flower. So they may jump around to several flowers. Honeybees can be easily transported. The nests of some of these small pollen bees, some are in the ground, and are just not practical to transport. Some are made of mud, and mud would crack, and that would not work because those would be developing bees. There's large numbers. You take a big colony of bees, whether it's 30,000, 40,000, or 50,000, and you say, well, maybe half of those are foraging bees. That's still a large number. If you're looking at the other pollinators, such as these pollen bees, solitary bees, they're very small numbers. We can be talking about dozens or hundreds, maybe thousands in some areas, but that's still a small number. Bumblebees. I would like you to start appreciating bumblebees. We're starting to take more notice of them because some species have become extinct fairly recently, and that's not good. They are good pollinators. They're used in greenhouses. Honeybees are remarkably inefficient in greenhouses. They come out, they see blue sky, fly up to the corner, and wait, and wait, and wait. The bumblebee comes out of her nest, says, all right, go to work, and will fly up and down the aisles of greenhouses doing pollination. There's some other aspect of bumblebee pollination. If you haven't heard of buzz pollination, I'll tell you a little bit about it. The flowers on tomatoes hang downward. As far as the honeybee is concerned, she can't do very much with one of those. The bumblebee grabs on and goes buzz and vibrates the flower, and the pollen can then fall on them, and they can then clean it up and take it. So the buzz pollination of bumblebees is very vital to the greenhouse cultivation of things like tomatoes and green peppers. So say thank you to a bumblebee for all her hard work to pollinate other plants also. Now, they come in different sizes. Some are a ½ inch, some are more, some are on up as much as 2 inches. Their nests are small. You may get 150 or 200 bumblebees in a colony of bumblebees. They'll live in cavities in the ground. They will live in clumps of dried grass. Old mouse nests, they think are just fine because the mouse has collected all of the dried grass and leaves and made a nice nest. At this point, I tell people to stop cleaning up your garden. Provide a place for bumblebees. What can you do? Any grass clippings can be left in a corner. The bumblebee may use that for making a nest, may actually nest underneath it. Straw, if you don't want to leave grass clippings and other clippings, get some straw and just make a mound of straw over in a corner so it doesn't bother your neatness. And you'll be helping a bumblebee. Now, they don't want to be disturbed in their nest, so leave them alone. And they'll be very happy and do a lot of pollinating for you. Well, what about your friendly carpenter bee? Yes, a lot of people don't like carpenter bees. They do bore holes in unpainted wood, and the nest will only contain about 4 to 6 young. The males do not sting, just like drones do not sting. The males of stinging insects have no stinging apparatus, so they can't sting. But the male's job, after mating with the female, of course, is to defend her and her nest. She is incredibly busy. She has to bore the hole in the wood. She has to lay the eggs. She has to then forage for the larva and provision it, seal it up, and she's just working and working and working. So his job is to defend, and he does a remarkable job of it and frightens everyone because they will dive bomb, buzz, 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 and I get hysterical phone calls in the springtime. Help, we're prisoners in our home. We can't even take the dog out. And I think, I know exactly what it is. I said, is it a large bee? Oh, it's enormous. Yes. And is it sort of dive bombing? Oh, yes, it does. It's attacking us. And I said, well, why don't you go outside and just stand there and let him dive bomb you and buzz in front of you? You're giving him something to do. He really is working hard. So give him something to do. He will appreciate it. They are good pollinators because, again, they have the fuzz, the hairs. Well, what about some of these other possible pollinators? Well, ants, beetles, butterflies, flies, moths, wasps. Well, they're useful, but they are actually only moderate pollinators. If you think about wasps or ants, they're smooth for the most part. Where are the hairs? Not there. But some pollen can stick to them, so they're really inefficient at a job of pollination. Butterflies tend to be a little more fuzzier, but not as much as moths. So a lot of flies mimic other bees, mimic bumblebees, mimic honeybees, and those flies have quite a few hairs. And they do visit flowers. They've probably surprised you from time to time, thinking that they were something other than a fly. And they will do some pollination, not as efficient as, say, a bumblebee or a honeybee with lots of fuzz. So you can watch for those and realize that they are doing something for pollination. As far as flower constancy goes, no, these will be very happy visiting this flower and another flower, it doesn't matter. So pollination is a bit chancy with these. I should say definitely in trouble. We hear a lot about the problems of pollinators today, not just honeybees, but all of these critters that I've mentioned. Reduced habitat, loss of biodiversity, and I'll be coming back to that. Urban and suburban sprawl. The more people, the more houses, the more towns, the bigger the towns, the bigger the cities. Well, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and other sides that we haven't even thought of yet. Those are definitely, we're living in a chemical era with our pesticides and fungicides and herbicides. At one point, we thought pesticides were the bad thing, but now we're finding out that the herbicides and fungicides have joined pesticides as bad things. All of these pollinators have to face Mother Nature, as we do. Weather. Too much rain. Well, maybe the bees can't get out. And maybe there's too much rain and the plants are putting forth more green and not so much flowers. You can have too little rain in a drought. And here again, pollinators can be in trouble with this. Where are the flowers? Or the flowers too small, or are not producing enough nectar and pollen. Too warm at the wrong time. Something comes into bloom and the bees aren't ready for it. Too cold at the wrong time. Things bloom and suddenly the weather has done something. It's too cold to fly. So those are the natural things all of the pollinators have to cope with. So the addition of the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides are an additional problem for them. These pollinators have coped with Mother Nature and have survived and succeeded over the millennia. But we are somewhat adding to their troubles. With loss of habitat, this could have been a beautiful meadow. Maybe it was a beautiful meadow last year. And this year, it's a field of wheat. Of any value? To us, yes, it's wheat. We can make something with it. It doesn't need pollination, so it offers nothing for our pollinators. Urban sprawl. It was once a beautiful meadow, perhaps, and now it's houses, and they're not planting bee-friendly plants. They're probably something the bees can't use. There's plenty of concrete and asphalt. So we are losing habitat for all of our pollinators. Biodiversity. We need it all, from the very small on up to the very big, because that gives us a balance in both animals and plants. We need the whole range of animals and the whole range of plants. We cannot just cover our countryside with non-useful plants, because that is going to affect the animals that live there. And remember, insects are animals. Honeybees are insects, so are bumblebees and our other beautiful pollinators. Jonathan Swift, and this was hundreds of years ago, realized that the naturalists knew about predators. We need our predators. Now, you heard Steve Martin this morning talking about hornets, but we need those wasps and the hornets. It would be nice to be able to have only our native ones, which fit into that biodiversity that we had. But unfortunately, we live in a global society where something can arrive from another country on a shipment of crockery. Probably how we in the United States got small hive beetle. It arrived on a ship at an eastern port. In what, we don't know exactly when. It was actually 1995 or 96 when it arrived. It wasn't recognized. So we have to today be very conscious of the arrival of new things. Certainly, the various hornets are predators. Unfortunately, when a new hornet arrives, it and the bees have not lived or co-evolved together so that our bees can have defenses against them. If you consider our predators that are native, they've been here a long time, and they are doing a very, very good job of keeping harmful animals, say harmful insects, suppressed. So please, the next time you are annoyed by a wasp, you could say, "Thank you, go about your work." Now, occasionally, wasps will build in a place convenient for them and terribly inconvenient for us. What to do? Well, sometimes you may have to annihilate them. But if it is not inconveniencing you, just thank them and go your own way and let them live. And tell others, please, don't kill every wasp you see. We need them. Sometimes I tell the story of the time I was growing beans, and I knew I had bean beetles. And as I was assessing any problems with the beans and the bean beetles, a yellow jacket flew in, grabbed the larva, of the bean beetle and flew back out. And I said, ooh, this looks good. A few minutes later, she was back, grabbed another bean beetle larva, flew back. It only took about 2 or 3 minutes round trip. So I knew her nest was close by. I knew she needed meat for herself and her family. And I thought, my bean beetle problem is solved. And I walked off. I didn't need to do anything. I had a valuable predator. I still don't know where she had her nest. It didn't matter because it was not inconveniencing me at all. She was hard at work. So think about that the next time you see wasps at work, which are keeping various populations down. Some wasps, like spiders. That's fine. But we need some spiders too to keep other insects down. So I'm on a bit of a campaign of preserving predators. We need them. Well, what can you do? Well, I've poured some information into your brain. Think about what I've said. Make some decisions. And take appropriate action. Now, I've got some things I want to show you in just a minute. I want to thank the Blaxland family for having me here to tell you about the pollinators and the plants that are being pollinated. Now, if I could have my, just put it up here. Good. The IBRA has some wonderful publications, and if you're not familiar with them, please stop by their stand and look. This one, very small, called Garden Plants for Bees. It's inexpensive. There's no pretty pictures, but that doesn't matter. It tends to keep the cost down, actually. And if you know someone who says, how can I help the bees? Give them one of these. Now, they can find out shrubs, perennials, annuals, vines, trees, all the names in here, and whether it has pollen and or nectar, and even is a bumblebee plant. And it's very handy, it's very nice to give to people who do not want to be beekeepers, but say, I want to do something to help the bees. So stop by, if you're not familiar, stop by the IBRA stand and take a look at it and buy a few. I have some at home that I give to people, and I always take it to my bee meetings to show my beekeepers what they can plant in their gardens. So that's one nice book. One that I certainly hope when I hold it up you'll say, oh yes, I have it. If you don't have it, go get it. It's simply called Plants for Bees. Well, that's nice. It's by Kirk and Howes. It's a classic, and it really is absolutely super. Yes, it's a big book, but it's wonderful. You'll spend many nice evenings with it. And we've got a couple of others. The habitat management for wild bees, which are those lovely little pollen bees you saw, and wasps, my friends. So that's a very nice book. Habitat management, what you can do to keep these pollinators and predators happy. And then forage for pollinators in an agricultural landscape. That's another book of Iber's, and that is a nice, worthwhile one. I trust you know about the colors of pollen loads. There's handy cards with pollen colors on and this, so that you can have some fun while you're watching for pollinators in your garden and you see some of the colors of pollen. Then you know what they like and prefer. So I thank you. If there are questions.
You mentioned very, very briefly about flies, and the problem with flies is lack of hairs, and also lack of constancy for flowers. I haven't mentioned an awful lot about hoverflies. Do hoverflies come under the category of flies? Because there are some that are supposed to be quite good pollinators.
Yes, he asked about hoverflies. Yes, they do visit flowers, and yes, they are pollinators. They are one in the class of mimics, that they don't look like the ordinary housefly, but they look like something else. There are quite a few of these mimics, and they do pollinate, but again, they don't have some of the characteristics of a good pollinator. That doesn't mean they aren't doing a good job, but they do visit flowers. Pollen will get carried on them. The wind-pollinated plants produce a very dry, dusty pollen. The other plants that are not wind-pollinated but have to have some carrier produce a pollen, and look at some of the pollen pictures, it's heavier and it's stickier and will cling to even a fairly smooth body or to one with a few hairs. So hoverflies do come into pollination, but again, lack of flower constancy, lack of a really fuzzy body doesn't put them in the category of super pollinators.
You mentioned constancy in terms of some of the pollinators, but I can see how honeybees are constant, but are bumblebees also constant in the flowers they visit?
They certainly can be. They have more constancy than some of the pollen bees. A lot depends upon what is blooming at the time. Their needs do not seem to be as dramatic, I should say, as the honeybee that is known for its flower constancy. Bumblebees in the greenhouse, of course, do very well because they're only presented with one thing. But in the natural landscape, they're apt to go from one to another, unless there's a very desirable plant.
Is there any evidence that honeybees elbow out bumblebees, so that if there are a lot of honeybee farmers in an area, does it mean a decline, or could it mean a decline in bumblebee populations?
No, they seem to get along quite well. There were some studies done of various pollinators and interference, and the conclusion was everything worked fine, just leave it alone.
I understand there are some strains of oilseed rape which are self-pollinating. What are the pros and cons of seed salesmen producing self-pollinating crops?
He asked about self-pollinating crops, for example, the oilseed rape, some varieties self-pollinating and others not. There seems to be sometimes with certain crops a desire to have self-pollinating ones, because then if there is a decline in pollinators, you can still have oilseed rape. However, it's again here a loss of forage for bees, because if it's not needed, it's not there. So there are some other self-pollinating plants, but there's not much we can do, I would say, with the companies that are producing crops that are self-pollinating. And I have heard that many would love to have self-pollinating crops, then they wouldn't need to have bees to come in to pollinate. They could just sit back and say, look, that particular crop is doing it all by itself. But I think we'll always have the need for some pollinator need. It's going to be hard to say. It's a commercial crop.
I'm going to say something a little controversial here.
Yes.
The trouble with constancy with bees is shown in fruit trees, for instance, which are not self-fertile. And so if a bee discovers a highly pollinated, a heavy pollen drop in an apple tree, for instance, it will tell all its friends in the hive that that's the tree to go to. And they will all go to that tree. And the pollen then does not get distributed. So the ideal mix in an orchard is probably the smaller bees and the bumblebees who bumble about from one tree to another.
He was saying that flower constancy could be a detriment to the pollination of something. For example, he said apple trees, that the honeybee would be told to go to this particular tree. Well, if there are a number of scout bees saying, there's trees over there, and there's trees over there, that probably everything does get pollinated. But in an apple orchard, you will find some of those lovely pollen bees and bumblebees, and they are going back and forth. In some cases, you want to see pollination with a different cultivar in order to get fruit. So the honeybees actually are not going to work on just one tree. Also, if there is more than one hive that is being used for pollination, this hive might go over there. The bees in this hive might go over there, depending on what the scout bees have reported. If you stand watching a hive on a nice busy day and just watch for a minute, you will see perhaps a majority of bees going that way, but there'll be another group going the other way, because the scout bees reported back to that group. So scout bees are reporting multiple places. So I don't think it, in other words, preserve the pollen bees and the bumblebees and let them work the orchards and let the honeybees do their thing in the orchards also. That's it?
That's it.
Good. Thank you very much.